I didn't say a word when my daughter-in-law cut me out of the family trip to France. I didn't even flinch when I saw them booking for 5 people, leaving me behind in the house I paid for. But that night, my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank, $10,500 charged to my primary card. I stayed silent. I only did one thing. 48 hours later, the trip was gone. And with it, so was her control. The glossy travel brochure was sitting right there on the granite island tucked next to my morning coffee. Provence and the French Riviera was splashed across the front in elegant gold script. My daughter-in-law, Julianne, tucked a stray blonde hair behind her ear and gave my son Caleb a look that made me feel like part of the furniture. It's all set, Caleb. Just the 2 of us, the kids and my sister. 5 people. You're okay with that, right, Eleanor? We just really felt like we needed a trip for the inner circle this year. I gripped my mug, feeling the heat of the ceramic. This was the house I had spent 30 years paying off after my husband passed. Suddenly, I felt like a ghost haunting my own kitchen. Caleb glanced at me for a split second, then immediately looked down at his toast. He didn't say, "But Mom should come," or even, "Why aren't we including her?" "Of course I understand," I said quietly. I stood up and placed my mug in the dishwasher. Julianne looked relieved, almost smug. She probably thought I'd just retreat to my room and swallow my pride like I always did. But as I watched the water run, I wasn't thinking about the Mediterranean. I was thinking about my banking app. When Caleb and Julianne moved into the guest suite 2 years ago, I gave them authorized access to my secondary account for emergencies and groceries, as Caleb put it. I never checked the statements because I wanted to trust them. But Julianne's smile today wasn't kind. It was calculated. I went to my room and locked the door. I didn't cry. Tears don't solve problems. Actions do. I opened my iPad and logged in. My heart didn't even speed up when I saw the pending transactions. I'm 68 years old. I've seen worse things than ingratitude. But the numbers were loud and clear. $10,500 reserved through a luxury travel portal. Charged to my card. Paid for with my trust. Would they realize their mistake before it was too late? I sat by the window watching the Seattle rain streak against the glass. That $10,500 wasn't an accident. It was the exact total for 5 people, including first-class upgrades and travel insurance. Julianne had set my card as the primary payment method, likely hoping I wouldn't notice the statement until they were already sipping wine in Cannes. I scrolled further back through the last few months. A wellness weekend at a spa in the Cascades' new designer furniture for their wing of the house, all disguised as household expenses. Caleb was my son, but he had become a passenger in his own life. He enjoyed the luxury his wife conjured up, with my money never bothering to ask where it came from. In my generation, we were taught that talking about money is vulgar. But today, I would stay silent and simply act. I clicked the button, Revoke Authorized User. With one tap, Caleb's access to my wealth vanished. Then I called the bank. I told the representative calmly that there were unauthorized charges and that I needed to freeze the card and request a new number immediately. "Do you want to file a police report for fraud, ma'am?" the voice on the line asked. "No," I replied. "I just want to protect what's mine. I didn't need the police to clean my house. I just needed to be firm." I went downstairs. Julianne was in the living room flipping through a guidebook. "Everything okay?" she asked without looking up. "Everything is exactly as it should be, Julianne," I said, starting to water my plants. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She felt so secure as the mistress of my house. She had no idea the foundation of her vacation had just evaporated. I felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't rage. It was the end of a long delusion. For years, I had filled the gaps Caleb left behind. I paid the property taxes, the repairs, and kept my mouth shut when Julian redecorated my kitchen. But France was the breaking point. You can't eat off someone's plate while telling them they aren't invited to the table. When would the first payment declined notification hit her phone? It was just before midnight when I heard the first signs of panic from the guest wing. Hectic pacing followed by hushed, urgent voices. I lay in bed, perfectly relaxed. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. A text from the bank. Transaction declined. $1,850. Hotel Beau Rivage. I put the phone back down and closed my eyes. I pictured Julianne sitting in front of her laptop, frantically refreshing the page. She was probably re-entering the card number over and over, looking for a typo or a system glitch. She'd wake Caleb up, and he'd try to blame it on technical issues, with sleepy eyes. The next morning, the atmosphere at breakfast was like a gathering storm. Julianne had dark circles under her eyes. Caleb was staring at his phone, tapping nervously. "Mom," he said, finally not looking up. "Did you have any issues with your bank yesterday? We couldn't get our hotel upgrade to go through." I sipped my Earl Grey. "With my bank, no, Caleb. Everything is fine on my end. I actually did some digital spring cleaning yesterday, deleted some old access codes and accounts. You have to be careful at my age." Julianne froze mid-pour with the coffee carafe. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "What do you mean, deleted?" she asked sharply. "I revoked all the authorizations that were no longer necessary," I said calmly. "I need a clearer picture of my finances moving forward." Caleb swallowed hard. He knew exactly what that meant, but he didn't dare admit in front of Julianne that they'd been planning to use my money for their family getaway. But the trip. Caleb started, but Julianne cut him off with a hard glare. She didn't want me to know she'd been caught. She still thought she could manipulate me or fix it behind my back. But they had no savings of their own. Every cent they made went into maintaining their image. The silence was heavy enough to feel. I stood up and grabbed my purse. "I'm going for a walk." "Enjoy your day," I said. I was curious to see how long they could keep up the charade. Would Julianne try to confront me directly? When I returned that afternoon, Caleb was waiting in the foyer. He didn't look sleepy anymore. He looked desperate. "Mom, we need to talk. There was a misunderstanding with the travel agency. They said the deposit was canceled." He followed me into the kitchen. I set my bag down and looked at him. "Why does that involve me, Caleb?" He hemmed and hawed. "Well, we thought you were helping us out, like you always do. Julianne said it would be okay to use your account as a bridge. We were going to pay you back." I sat down at the table. "So, let me get this straight. I wasn't invited on the trip, but my money was. My bank account was the sixth guest." Caleb turned beet red. He looked like a little boy caught stealing from a jar. Before he could answer, Julianne marched down the stairs. Her face was a mask of manufactured outrage. "Eleanor, this is incredibly petty of you. We're family. You have the money, and we just wanted a break after all the stress with the kids. How can you ruin this for us?" "I'm not ruining anything, Julianne," I said, my voice steady. "You planned a trip you couldn't afford with money that didn't belong to you. I simply stopped financing a theft." Julianne let out a bitter laugh. "Theft? Aren't you being a bit dramatic? You live here. We take care of things. You live in my house, Julianne. Rent-free." I interrupted. "I pay the taxes, the insurance, and up until today I've been paying for your groceries. If that's taking care of things, we have very different definitions of the word." In that moment, I realized Julianne never respected me. I was just a resource to be tapped. Caleb tried to play peacemaker, but he had no ground to stand on. Julianne, however, got louder. If this trip falls through, I'll tell everyone you're the reason your own grandkids didn't get a summer vacation. Is that what you want? I looked at her and felt no pain, only resolve. Tell them the truth, Julianne. Tell them you tried to take $10,500 from my account without asking. How would she react when she realized her threats had no teeth? Julianne realized words wouldn't work, so she changed tactics. Fine, she said coldly. If you want to play hardball, we'll have to set some new boundaries. We run this household after all. That evening, I noticed the first change. The lock on the laundry room, which happened to be located in their wing of the house, had been changed. I stood in front of the locked door with my basket. It was a classic power move. In the past, I might have knocked and apologized just to keep the peace. Not today. I went down to the basement and turned the shut-off valve for the hot water, the one that specifically fed their upstairs bathroom. A simple, mechanical fix. 10 minutes later, I heard Caleb shouting. Then he came sprinting down. "Mom, the hot water is out." Something must be wrong with the heater. I was sitting in the living room reading the paper. That's too bad, Caleb. Maybe the system is just as overextended as my bank account. I'll call a plumber tomorrow, if I have time. Julianne was right behind him, fuming. "You shut off the water. That's harassment." I looked at her over my reading glasses. "No, Julianne. It's maintenance, just like you maintained the laundry room door. If I can't wash my clothes, I assume you don't need hot water for your showers. It's only logical, right?" She was shaking with rage, but she finally understood the language of consequences. No more long debates. No compromises. Either we respected each other's space and property, or life in this house was going to get very uncomfortable for everyone. Caleb stood in the middle, looking at the locked laundry door and then at me. He finally saw that Julianne had gone too far. Without a word, he went and grabbed the new key and set it on the kitchen table. I gave a short nod, stood up, and turned the water back on. A small victory of logic over aggression. But the battle for France wasn't over. The cancellation window for the trip was closing in 24 hours. The next day, Julianne tried a much crueler method. She sent my grandkids, 8-year-old Leo and 6-year-old Maya, down to see me. They stood in my kitchen doorway with heartbreakingly sad faces. "Grandma, why can't we go to France?" Maya asked in a tiny voice. "Mommy says you took the money away." My heart squeezed, but I knew exactly who had put those words in their heads. I knelt down in front of them. "I didn't take any money away, sweetheart. But you know how, when you want a big Lego set, you have to save up your allowance first." Leo looked at me uncertainly. "But Mommy is crying." "Mommy is sad because she planned something that didn't work out," I explained gently. "But we can still have a great summer. We can camp out in the backyard or go down to the lake." I gave them each an apple and sent them back upstairs. I wouldn't let Julianne use those children as human shields. As soon as they were gone, Julianne appeared. "You are so heartless," she hissed. "How could you lie to them like that?" I stood up and met her gaze. "I didn't lie. You gave them hopes based on my retirement savings. If you want them to have a vacation, take out a loan. Or sell that new SUV you put the down payment for on my card." That hit home. The down payment for her car was another discovery from my bank audit. Julianne knew now that I knew everything. Her attempts to socially isolate me or guilt-trip me were bouncing off my new sense of self. I felt the power shift. I used to be the one begging for harmony. Now I was the one setting the terms. Caleb called me from work shortly after. "Mom, please, Julianne is losing it. Can't we just pay for part of it? Maybe just the flights." "No, Caleb. You're adults. Find a solution that doesn't involve my 401k. The pressure was mounting. The travel agency sent a final notice to the family email account, which I was still looped into. It was 6 p.m. The travel agency's deadline was 4 hours away. The upstairs was eerily quiet. No pacing, no arguing. I was making dinner when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't Julianne. It was just Caleb. He looked like he'd aged 5 years. His shoulders were slumped. He sat at the table where he used to do his homework as a kid. "We don't have the money, Mom," he said softly. "Julianne spent it all. The credit cards are maxed out. We were banking on this trip to, I don't know, save our marriage, I think." He looked at me almost pleadingly. For the first time in years, he was being honest, stripped of the scripts Julianne usually wrote for him. "You can't buy a marriage with my money, Caleb," I said gently. "And you certainly don't save one by betraying your mother." He nodded slowly. "I know." I looked the other way. It was easier to let her do whatever she wanted than to face the reality of our finances. She booked that trip because she wanted to show off to her sister. In that moment, I felt pity for my son, but no urge to rescue him. He had to learn this lesson. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I have to cancel the trip. And I'm going to tell Julianne that we have to move out if we can't afford to live here properly." That was a strong sentence, one I didn't think he had in him. You don't have to move out, Caleb, but you do have to pay rent. A fair amount. And Julianne needs to get a job instead of spending her days planning how to spend my money. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a simple rental agreement I'd prepared. No lawyers, just clear numbers. Caleb read it over. It wasn't an overcharge, but it was enough to cover expenses and give me my independence back. He signed it with a shaky hand. "Thanks, Mom, and I'm sorry, truly." I put my hand over his. "It's a start, Caleb. But would Julianne accept this new beginning, or would she rather burn it all down?" At 10 p.m. sharp, the confirmation from the travel agency arrived canceled. Cancellation fees of $3,200 applied. Since the deposit had been blocked from my account, that amount was officially gone. But it was a price I was willing to pay to end the nightmare. All hell broke loose upstairs. I heard Julianne screaming. It sounded like things were being thrown. Caleb tried to calm her down, but she was beyond reason. The dream of France, the Instagram photos, and the envy of her sister had vanished. And to her, I was the villain. A few minutes later, she burst into my kitchen. She had a suitcase in her hand. "I can't stay here anymore. You've ruined everything," she yelled. "I'm going to stay with my sister. Caleb can stay here and rot with his holy mother." I stayed seated. "That's your choice, Julianne. Don't forget to leave your key on the table." She slammed the door so hard, the pictures on the wall rattled. I heard her car tires screech as she sped away. Caleb came down a moment later. He looked exhausted, but strangely relieved. "She's gone," he said. "She says she won't come back until you apologize and pay off the credit cards." "Then I suppose she'll be gone a long time," I replied. Caleb sat with me. We were silent for a long time. The silence wasn't threatening anymore. It was cleansing. The kids were asleep upstairs. They'd luckily slept through the storm. I knew the next few weeks would be hard, but the air was clear. Caleb started talking about his job and how he wanted to take on overtime to pay me back for the cancellation fees. For the first time in years, he had a plan that wasn't based on a handout. I realized that my actions hadn't just protected me, they'd woken my son up from his lethargy. Was this the end? Or would Julianne find a way back? 3 weeks went by. Julianne was still at her sister's. Caleb had started running the household on his own. He cooked for the kids, got them to school, and paid me the first month's rent on time. It wasn't much, but it was honest money. I helped with the grandkids, but I didn't take over everything anymore. I had made my own plans. I signed up for a pottery class and started meeting old friends for hikes. My account was secure, my card was new. I felt lighter than I had in a decade. One afternoon, Julianne suddenly appeared in the backyard. She didn't look so arrogant anymore. Her sister had likely grown tired of hosting her. "I want to see the kids," she said quietly when she saw me on the patio. "Of course, Julianne. They're upstairs." I replied, friendly but distant. She hesitated. "Caleb says there's a lease now, and that I need to find work." "That's right. If you want to live here, you have to contribute. We aren't a bank. We're a family." She looked around the garden, which I'd been replanting. "I'm sorry about the card," she said almost inaudibly. It wasn't a grand apology, just a necessary surrender. I just nodded. "Words are nice, Julianne. Actions are better. We'll see how things go." There was no big emotional explosion. I didn't invite her for coffee. I just let her go inside to talk to her husband. I had drawn my line, and it held. I wasn't the useful grandma anymore who paid for everything and kept her mouth shut. I was the owner of the house and the master of my own life. Caleb and Julianne talked for hours. That evening, I found out she'd be staying under the new terms. She already had an interview at a local bakery. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. How would our first dinner under the new rules go? A month had passed since the trip was canceled. We were all in the backyard for a Saturday barbecue. Caleb was flipping burgers and the kids were running through the sprinkler. Julianne was setting the table. She was quieter now, less demanding. She was working part-time and she'd used her first paycheck to help Caleb with the utility bill. We didn't talk about France. The wound was still there, but it was healing. I had learned that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, but you have to save yourself before you go under. My finances were separate, and my heart was at peace. "Mom, do you want another glass of wine?" Caleb asked, smiling at me. It was a real smile, not a mask. "I'd love one, Caleb," I said. I looked over at Julianne as she set down a bowl of salad. She caught my eye and gave a small nod. It wasn't a sign of deep love, but it was respect. And right now, that mattered more to me. I thought about stories I'd heard of women who just gave up and moved away. I had stayed, but I had changed the landscape. Both are paths to freedom. My path was reclaiming my home without losing the people in it. I had proven that at nearly 70. I wasn't just an old piece of furniture to be used. If someone asked me today if I'm sad I didn't see the French Riviera, I'd laugh. I learned more about myself and my family in these few weeks than I ever would have on a guided tour. True strength doesn't need loud words or expensive hotels. It just needs a firm no in the right place. The sun began to set behind the Douglas firs in my yard. I leaned back in my chair and soaked in the moment. I was Eleanor, I was independent, and I was finally the center of my own life again. That was the best investment I ever made. Would you have stayed if you were in Eleanor's shoes, or would you have sold the house and left them to figure it out? That's a question everyone has to answer for themselves. Sometimes you don't have to fight to keep what's yours. You just have to stop giving and everything finds its rightful place.